Hey friend, welcome to True Crime Whispers Before Sleep. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy true crime stories told in a calm and relaxing way, you'll feel right at home. Before you get too cozy, tap that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chilling case. And if you feel like it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's story. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place where 3 generations once lived under the same roof. Patricia Mann was 78 years old, soft-spoken, set in her ways, and known throughout her neighborhood in East Ukraine Township for her morning walks and unwavering loyalty to her family. Her daughter, Carol Ray, a woman hardened by years of bitterness and private battles, still lived with her, along with Carol's 3-year-old daughter, little Marina. A multi-generational home, but one slowly cracking at the seams. And then one day, Patricia disappeared. No one saw her leave. No one heard her say goodbye. One moment she was there, and the next, nothing. No word, no warning. Just gone. John Miller, Patricia's grandson and Carol's estranged son, had a bad feeling that wouldn't go away. He hadn't seen his grandmother in weeks. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. At first he thought it was just tension, the kind that festered in a family when money and resentment mixed. But something felt off, deeply off, and it started with a text message. It came out of nowhere, short, robotic, strangely worded, allegedly from Patricia. But John had known her all his life, and she didn't text like that. Her punctuation, her tone, even the rhythm of her speech was missing. This message didn't sound like her. It didn't feel like her. He tried to brush it off. Maybe she was sick. Maybe someone else had her phone. Maybe, just maybe it was nothing. But the feeling stayed. And then it grew. It wasn't just the message. It was everything else. The Facebook silence, the unanswered calls, the way his mother, Carol, had started talking around questions, avoiding eye contact, deflecting, like she was hiding something. And John couldn't ignore it anymore. On January 21st, just after 10 p.m., John picked up the phone and made the call that would change everything. He called the police. He told them he hadn't spoken to his grandmother in weeks, that something didn't feel right, that he thought something had happened to her. When officers arrived at Carol Ray's home the first time, it was routine, a wellness check, nothing urgent. They knocked on the door. Carol answered with a flat expression and a tired smile. "Oh, Mom's not here," she said casually. "She's at her doctor's appointment. Stayed overnight at my sister's." The officers took notes. They asked a few questions. Everything seemed to check out, but something, even then, felt off. They thanked Carol and left, but the pit in John's stomach only got deeper. He couldn't let it go. The next morning, January 22nd, he called again. This time he was firmer, more certain. He needed answers, real ones, and this time, he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Officers returned to the house. Second visit. More questions. Carol met them at the door again. Her story hadn't changed. Not really. Patricia was still with her sister. She had picked up her medication. She had visited just the other day. "She was here last night," Carol said, voice clipped. "She left around 5, went to get her meds. She's doing fine." But the officers weren't convinced. They asked to check Patricia's room. It was untouched, neatly made bed, clothes folded in the closet, drawers full, her purse still in the house, no signs of packing, no signs she had left recently, or at all. Something wasn't right. And then came the call to the doctor's office. The officer stood in Carol's kitchen, cell phone pressed to his ear, notebook open. "This is Officer Pelt with the local department," he said. "We're trying to confirm the whereabouts of a patient, Patricia Mann. Can you verify if she has an appointment scheduled with you today?" A long pause. "No," the receptionist replied carefully. "We haven't seen her. She hasn't been here." Officer Pelt looked up from his notes, met his partner's eyes, and nodded once. That's when things started to unravel. Carol had lied, and now they had proof. Carol Ray stood in the narrow doorway of her mother's bedroom, arms folded, lips pursed, watching the officers with guarded eyes. She didn't like their questions, not the tone, not the persistence, and especially not the suspicion that was starting to show through. "Look," she said, exhaling sharply. "My mother's fine. She went to stay with my sister. I don't know what John's told you, but he's been stirring up drama for years. It's always something with him." But the problem wasn't just John anymore. It was the inconsistencies. Patricia's medications were still in the house, her clothes, her shoes by the front door, her reading glasses folded neatly on the kitchen table. And when officers asked to see a recent photo or message exchange between mother and daughter, Carol hesitated just a little too long. "She came by to pick up her things," she added nervously. "She's been back and forth. I don't keep track of every little moment." The house itself seemed to whisper another story. It was dim, cluttered, and smelled faintly of mold and something older, something harder to define. The kind of smell that didn't come from disuse, but from something lingering too long, something decaying. Officer Pelt stepped into the hallway, taking mental note of the way Carol hovered behind him, not leading, not offering, just watching. "Mind if we check the backyard?" he asked. Carol blinked. "The backyard?" "Just routine." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flickered toward the rear window. A flicker, subtle, quick, but enough to raise the hair on his arms. He was trained to notice that. She finally nodded. "Sure, but there's nothing out there." Outside, the yard was overgrown. Patches of dead grass, an old rusted swing, a dog bowl without a dog. Nothing overtly alarming. No obvious signs of disturbance. But still, that feeling, that low, crawling sense of something being off. When they returned inside, Officer Pelt tried again. "Carol, I'm going to be honest with you. The doctor's office said your mom hasn't been seen there in months. Your sister said she hasn't heard from her. Your son thinks something terrible's happened. You've told us 3 different stories in the last 10 minutes. Carol's arms tightened around her chest. "You don't know this family. John's trying to make me look bad. My mom's just private. She doesn't want to talk to anyone right now. That's all." But her voice lacked conviction. And now, a deeper investigation was underway. Officer sat down with John again, this time at the station. He didn't hold back. "My mom's always been unstable," he said flatly. "She's been on and off meds for years. When she doesn't take them, she spirals. And now my grandma's just gone. You tell me what that sounds like." "What makes you think she would hurt her?" the detective asked. John looked down at his hands, fingers twitching. "Money," he said. "Control. My mom's been living off her for years. Disability, food stamps, whatever. But it's not enough. She started talking about signing over the house, the car, insurance. Next thing I know, I get a text from my grandma saying she's doing all that, but it doesn't sound like her. It sounds like my mom pretending to be her." The detective leaned back, took a slow breath. "So you think Carol's using her identity?" "I think she's doing more than that." And the more they listened, the more the pieces started to align. Carol had motive. She had opportunity. She had no clear alibi, and most disturbingly, she had the house. The one place no one had searched properly. Not yet. The officers knew what they had to do. They needed access, full consent, a legal search. But Carol wasn't going to make it easy. When they returned for the third time, Carol greeted them with thin patience. This time, her tone had shifted. Less defensive, more tired. Like she was wearing a mask and it had begun to slip. "She's fine," Carol said for the fifth time that day. "Then let's call her," Officer Pelt replied. "Put her on speaker, right now." Carol hesitated. Too long. They watched her closely. Her breathing, the slight tremor in her hand, the way her eyes wouldn't quite meet theirs. "I'll try," she mumbled, reaching for her phone. She tapped a number, put the phone on speaker. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. "Guess she's not answering," Carol muttered. But everyone in the room knew what that meant. Carol wasn't calling Patricia, because Patricia was gone. John Miller knew his grandmother, knew her voice, knew the way her texts always ended in full words, careful punctuation, and sometimes emojis she didn't quite understand. He knew she called when something was important, never texted. And if she did, it never sounded like this. But the message he received a few days ago was off. It read, "I'm signing house and insurance to Carol. Don't worry. All is well. Love you." No comma, no period, no warmth, not her voice. It was the kind of text you'd expect from someone trying to sound like Patricia, but missing the essence entirely. That's when the fear took root in John's gut. He had seen this before. Carol slipping into manic states. Carol spiraling when she was off her medication. Carol lying, covering, creating whole realities to protect herself. But this wasn't just delusion. This felt like a cover-up. And the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. His mother stood to gain from Patricia's disappearance, financially, emotionally, maybe even legally. That's when he started going back through the messages, line by line, comparing older texts from Patricia to the recent ones. Everything was different. The spelling, the phrases, even the timing. Patricia never sent messages past 9 p.m., but now texts were appearing at 1 a.m., as if someone was fabricating her presence. Carol. John brought this to the police. They listened, carefully, then they dug deeper. They found that the doctor's office Carol had named didn't have Patricia scheduled, didn't have her in their records. In fact, Patricia hadn't been seen by any verified medical provider in months. Not since late October, nearly 3 months before she disappeared. The tension was building fast. The officers weren't dealing with a simple missing persons case anymore. They were circling a potential crime. Back at the house, Carol was unraveling. Her stories shifted daily. One moment, Patricia was with her sister. The next, she was at a medical appointment. Then, she had supposedly gone to spend time with a friend upstate. Every answer was vague. Every sentence wrapped in deflection. "I don't keep track of everything my mom does," she snapped during one visit. "She's a grown woman. She doesn't have to tell me where she's going every second." But the problem wasn't where Patricia had gone. It was that no one had seen her. No family, no friends, not even neighbors. And worse, her sister, the one Carol swore she was with, hadn't seen Patricia in 5 years. 5 years. That broke the last thread of credibility. At that point, even the detectives began to look at Carol less like a daughter and more like a suspect. John wasn't surprised. He'd lived through her instability for years. The lies, the manipulation, the way she always played victim. But now, there was something else in the air. Something darker. And it wasn't just about money or resentment anymore. It was about silence. It was about what lay behind the closed door of Patricia's bedroom. And what wasn't there. John sat in the small interview room at the station, staring down at the table. His fingers were clasped tight, knuckles pale, voice steady, but his eyes said it all. "She's lying," he told the officer. "She's lying about everything." Detective Jerry Binks, a seasoned investigator with a gut that rarely failed him, watched John carefully. He'd seen this kind of tension before, the kind that doesn't come from paranoia, but from knowing someone too well. "Start from the beginning," Binks said. John nodded. He told them everything. How Carol had always been difficult, how she lived off his grandmother for years, floating from one crisis to the next. Medical issues, financial problems, broken relationships, custody battles. Patricia, despite it all, had always stood by her, paid her bills, fed her daughter, kept a roof over her head. But something had changed in the past year. Carol had started pushing Patricia to sign over the house, transfer the title, hand over the insurance documents. She said she wanted to secure the future, John explained. But it wasn't about the future. It was about control. Carol didn't just need help. She needed power. And when Patricia refused to go along, the pressure mounted. John showed detectives a recent text message that read, "Don't worry, John. Carol will take care of it. I signed everything over." The problem? It wasn't signed by Patricia. It was about Patricia, and it came from her number. "It's not her," John repeated. "She would never write that." Binks raised an eyebrow. "So you think your mother is impersonating her?" "I know she is." "Why?" John's voice dropped. "Because she's done it before." And that changed everything. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was pattern, motive, intent. And then came the curveball. TJ, Carol's ex-husband. He walked into the station unannounced, carrying a manila folder full of documents and a notebook he'd been keeping for months. "I think something happened," he said, "and I think Carol's hiding it." TJ wasn't just an ex. He was the father of Carol's other children, a man who had known her at her worst, and according to him, that had been very bad. "She spirals," he said. "When she's off her meds, she doesn't think straight, and lately, she hasn't been taking anything." He sat down beside John, flipping open his notebook. Inside were handwritten logs, dates, times, notes of strange phone calls, sudden disappearances, moments when Carol had claimed Patricia was just resting or gone out. Notes about the day she told TJ she needed money for Patricia's cancer treatments, except Patricia didn't have cancer. "She just started saying it one day," TJ muttered. "And every time I asked for proof, she changed the subject." That's when TJ showed them the most disturbing part. A message that had supposedly come from Patricia, authorizing Carol to take over all her affairs. "But it wasn't written by her," he said. "It was written by Carol. I recognize the way she types. Same typos, same phrases. I've lived with her. I know." Detective Binks leaned back in his chair, the air in the room thickening. They had a family in pieces. A missing elderly woman, a daughter with unstable behavior, a grandson begging for someone to listen, and now, an ex-husband confirming it all. What they didn't have was a body. What they didn't have was a confession. But the pressure was mounting, and Carol's lies were starting to suffocate her. Detective Jerry Binks tapped his pen against his notebook, thinking through the next move. He had enough doubt to keep pushing, but not enough evidence to break the case open. The key now was simple. Prove Carol lied about Patricia's whereabouts in a way that couldn't be explained away. That meant calling the doctor. Again. This time it was Officer Pelt who made the call. He stood outside the Ray residence, phone pressed to his ear, notebook balanced on one hand. The January wind bit through his jacket, but he barely noticed. What he needed now was confirmation. A voice came on the line. Receptionist. Familiar. This is Officer Pelt with East Ukraine PD. I'm following up on a patient, Patricia Mann. We were told she had an appointment this week, possibly today. Can you confirm? There was silence, then hesitation. No, the receptionist said carefully. We have no upcoming appointments, and she hasn't been here in a very long time. How long? I'd have to check, but it's been several months, possibly before Thanksgiving. Pelt lowered the phone and exhaled slowly. That was it, the third contradiction. Carol's story, that Patricia had gone to her regular appointment, that she'd even stayed overnight near the clinic, was a complete fabrication. He stepped back into the living room. Carol stood near the fireplace, arms crossed tightly, eyes darting between him and the door like she was trying to find the nearest escape route. The doctor's office says your mother hasn't been seen there for months, Pelt said evenly. You told us she had an appointment this morning. Carol blinked, then smirked. Maybe they made a mistake. That office is a mess, always screwing things up. Pelt didn't answer. He didn't have to. She was unraveling and she knew it. That's when the excuses started pouring out. She was at her sister's the other night, Carol said quickly. Maybe she's still there. We talked to her sister, Pelt said calmly. She says she hasn't seen Patricia in over 5 years. Carol's jaw twitched. Well, maybe she forgot. She forgot 5 years? Another silence. Carol shifted on her feet, suddenly defensive. Look, my mom doesn't want to be found right now. That's not a crime. She just needs space. You don't know what it's like, always being hounded by John and everyone else, treating her like she's some golden idol while I do all the damn work. There it was. The crack. That edge of resentment flaring just beneath the surface. You're frustrated, Pelt said carefully. We get it, but people are worried, and your story doesn't add up. I'm not a liar, she snapped. Then let us look, he said. Let us search the house. No, she said instantly. And just like that, the door slammed shut, but the investigation didn't stop. Back at the station, Binks and Pelt began digging deeper. They pulled property records, financial transactions, social security activity. They cross-checked Patricia's prescriptions. All of it pointed to one disturbing pattern. No movement, no activity, no trace of Patricia Mann for over a month. That wasn't space, that was disappearance. And now, suspicion had fully taken root. Every excuse Carol gave sounded more like a stall. Every delay felt like a cover, and then came the tipping point. TJ, the ex-husband, brought them something else. A Facebook message. It had supposedly come from Patricia's account a week earlier, sent to one of her old friends. But when officers examined it, they saw the grammar, the tone, the sentence structure. All of it matched Carol's texting style. The same awkward phrasing, the same abrupt signs-offs, the same deliberate typos. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. Carol was impersonating Patricia online, keeping her alive digitally, creating the illusion of presence when there was none. By now, the web Carol Ray had woven was no longer just tangled. It was tearing apart. The police had circled her 3 times, and each time her story shifted just enough to stay afloat. But the holes were widening, and the officers were growing tired of chasing ghosts. Detective Binks sat across from Officer Pelt in the precinct's back room, a whiteboard behind them filled with dates, phone calls, and timelines. Patricia Mann's name was circled in red at the center. There's no doctor, Pelt said. No sister, Binks added. No activity on her bank account since early December. No pharmacy pickups, no verified sightings, no phone calls. Just messages that scream forgery. They were missing the one thing that could tie it all together. Patricia herself, dead or alive. At Carol's home, the situation was deteriorating fast. During their third visit, officers pressed harder. "We need to know where she is," Pelt said. "You've told us 3 different locations now, and none of them are checking out. Your mother hasn't been seen or heard from in weeks. That's not just unusual, that's dangerous." Carol didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the sink as if the conversation wasn't happening. "Carol," Pelt repeated, "we need to verify she's okay. Just bring her to the phone, or let us talk to her on speaker. That's all we're asking." Carol sipped her water. "She's fine," she said quietly. "She just doesn't want to talk to John. That's what this is really about." The officers didn't bite. They'd heard too many excuses by now, and this wasn't about family drama anymore. It was about the law. When asked again if they could search the home, Carol clammed up. Her eyes narrowed, her voice dropped, and her words became carefully rehearsed. "No, not without a warrant." She had learned the rules well enough to hide behind them. But outside that house, the Ray family was falling apart. John was furious and frightened. He knew what his mother was capable of. "She's hiding something," he said again, voice cracking. "She's done this before. Covered things, manipulated people, made herself the victim. But this time it's worse. This time, she's not just lying, she's erasing someone." Meanwhile, Carol kept spinning. She told the police that Patricia had gone out of town, that she was staying with a friend, that she was tired of everyone treating her like an invalid. But every time they followed one of her leads, it fell apart like a sandcastle at high tide. Patricia wasn't with a friend. She wasn't at her sister's. She wasn't at a hospital. And now, she wasn't online either. Her phone was off. Her social media had gone silent. The messages that once trickled out from her accounts had stopped altogether. And the last person to ever see her was Carol. That simple fact was becoming impossible to ignore. And so the pressure began to mount. Back at the house, officers confronted her again. "This is no longer a wellness check," Officer Pelt said. "This is an active investigation into a possible missing person, and right now, you're obstructing that process." Carol didn't flinch. "She's not missing," she insisted. "She just doesn't want to be found." "If that's true," Pelt said evenly, "then prove it. Show us. One call, one sighting, one voice message, anything." Carol swallowed. The silence between them stretched too long. "She's fine," she muttered again. "You'll see." But no one believed her anymore. Not even herself. The pressure in Carol Ray's living room was thick enough to choke on. 3 officers stood by the window, one at the kitchen entrance. Carol sat on the edge of her couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes darted from one officer to the next, trying to gauge who might be her ally, but she found none. Detective Binks had arrived now, and his approach was different, quieter, more deliberate. He didn't push her, not at first. He just sat across from her and studied her in silence. Carol hated silence. "I've already told you," she began, trying to sound calm. "My mom doesn't want to be bothered." "Carol," Binks said softly, "we've talked to your sister. She hasn't seen your mom. We've spoken to her doctor. She hasn't had an appointment in months. Her friend doesn't exist. Her social security hasn't been touched. Her phone's off. And no one has heard her voice since early December." Carol looked down. "You want to know where your mom is?" Binks continued. "So do we. But let me tell you what this looks like from our side." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You live in this house. You're the last one to see her. She stopped contacting everyone around the time you started asking her to sign things over. Now she's gone, and you won't let us search the property. Tell me, what does that sound like to you?" Carol's throat tightened. Her grip on her knees turned white-knuckled. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "Then let us look." "I said no." "Because you're hiding something." "No." "Then tell me where your mother is." "I told you." "You haven't told us anything. You've told us stories. You've danced around every question, fed us names and addresses that don't exist, and you've impersonated your mother online. So I'll ask you again. Where is she?" Carol's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her body was trembling now, the facade of control cracking wide open. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know where she is." The words dropped like stones into the room. A pause. Then Bink stood. "We're not leaving without answers." Carol's head dropped into her hands. Her breath hitched. For a second, the room fell into that kind of fragile stillness that only comes when the truth is circling close. "We don't want to do this the hard way," Bink said. "We don't want to treat this like a homicide, but you're not giving us a choice." She looked up, tearless but wide-eyed. "I'm not a killer." "Then prove it." But she didn't. She wouldn't. Instead, she said nothing at all. And that silence was damning. The officers stood, exchanged looks, and stepped out of the house. They had no body, no confession, no legal grounds to force entry. But they had something else now. Something stronger than suspicion. They had intent. Carol Ray wasn't just lying. She was protecting something, and it was hidden inside that house. By now, Patricia Mann was more than missing. She was a ghost, a name on paper, a face on an old ID, a silent echo in a house that no longer said her name. Detective Jerry Binks knew it. So did Officer Pelt, and in his gut, John Miller felt it too. There had been no movement, no phone activity, no digital footprint, not even the faintest whisper of a credit card transaction. Patricia had vanished, not slowly, not with warning, but suddenly, cleanly, quietly. That's not how a woman her age disappears. And yet, the one person who should have sounded the alarm, Carol Ray, was still trying to spin it as some family drama blown out of proportion. "She's probably at a friend's house," Carol muttered when they showed up for the fourth time. Binks didn't even answer. He'd stopped reacting to her excuses days ago. Instead, he spoke to John again. This time, in the quiet of the precinct, away from the clutter and chaos of Carol's world. John was tired, but clear. "I haven't spoken to my grandmother since Thanksgiving," he said. "The last time I heard her voice, she was talking about making Christmas cookies with Marina. She never would have missed Christmas. Ever." "And the messages?" Binks asked. "Fake," John said. "I know her voice. I know her tone. It's not her." He pulled out a binder, thick with screenshots, dates, notes, side-by-side comparisons of Patricia's old messages and the new ones. "She never writes like this," he said. "These ones are cold, mechanical. She doesn't talk like this. Not to me. Not to anyone." It was evidence only a family member could piece together, and it painted a portrait far more terrifying than the officers had yet seen. Because if Carol was impersonating her mother, then where was Patricia? Binks followed up with Carol's ex-husband, TJ, again. "I haven't seen Patricia since Halloween," TJ said. "She looked tired, but she was still herself. She told me she was worried about Carol, said she'd been off her meds for a while." "Did she say she was afraid?" Binks asked. TJ hesitated. "She said she was thinking about moving out, said she was tired of living in fear." That word echoed. Fear. It had been there all along, tucked inside John's phone calls, buried in Patricia's sudden silence, embedded in Carol's erratic behavior. This wasn't a case of someone running away. This was something far worse. Carol had created a vacuum, an invisible boundary where truth couldn't enter, and Patricia couldn't leave. That was the real story now. And the house? It was the epicenter. Every clue, every lie, every moment of avoidance pointed back to one place, the home Carol shared with Patricia. And still, no one could get inside. Legally, their hands were tied. Without consent or a warrant, the house was just that, a house. But the longer they waited, the colder the trail became. Every hour that passed made it harder to prove what everyone was beginning to suspect, that Patricia Mann wasn't missing. She was gone, and the truth was buried with her. It stood there like any other home on the block. Weathered siding, a creaking porch, cracked flower pots on the steps. But to Detective Jerry Binks and Officer Pelt, Carol Ray's house felt different now. It breathed with silence, a silence that smelled of rot, of memories erased, of something withheld. They wanted inside, desperately, but they couldn't break the law to do it. Without probable cause or Carol's consent, they were shackled to procedure. And Carol, she was using the law like a shield, hiding behind it with shaky confidence and rehearsed apathy. "I told you," she repeated. "There's nothing to find." But that wasn't true, because there was everything to find. Carol's behavior had changed. She was no longer defensive. She was evasive. Her eyes scanned the room during every conversation. Her words were thinner, her tone quieter, and her body language? It spoke louder than anything she ever said. When the officers asked if Patricia had packed a bag before leaving, Carol stammered. When she left, she didn't need much. No medication? She had some. No clothes? She doesn't like taking too much. It stresses her out. Binks leaned forward. Did she leave behind her toothbrush? Carol froze, then blinked. I think so. That was all he needed to hear. Because no one leaves for weeks without a toothbrush. Not voluntarily. And when Binks pressed her again, when he asked her to walk through exactly how Patricia left that day, what time, what car, what bag, what shoes, Carol cracked. "I don't remember," she snapped. "Why are you treating me like I'm a suspect?" "Because you're the only one still standing here," Binks said flatly. She stood up. "This is harassment." "No," he said. "This is what it looks like when the truth refuses to stay buried. But still, no consent, no warrant, no entry." It was maddening, because every moment spent on the porch, every inch they couldn't step beyond that front door, felt like a step further away from justice. Back at the station, the pressure built. John was begging them to go further. TJ was asking if they could at least conduct a welfare sweep. Neighbors started calling in, reporting that they hadn't seen Patricia in over a month. Some had noticed strange noises. Others had seen Carol taking out trash bags in the dead of night. But none of it was enough for a judge to sign off on a warrant. They were boxed in until someone broke. And that someone was Carol. It started small, an offhand comment during a follow-up conversation. "She was brushing her hair," Carol muttered, and then she left. Binks caught it. "You said she left in a rush, but now she had time to brush her hair?" Carol's mouth tightened. "That's what I remember. You said she packed nothing, but she brushed her hair. In the bathroom, which we haven't seen." Carol stood, trembling now. "You're twisting things." "No, I'm following them." She looked around the room like a cornered animal. And for the first time, she didn't look defensive. She looked terrified. That's when Binks made his final offer. "If you didn't do anything," he said, "and if your mother died of natural causes, or slipped, or fell, then this is your chance to tell the truth. If you waited too long to report it because you were scared, we can understand that. But if she's in this house, and you're pretending she's not..." He let the sentence hang. Carol said nothing. Not yes, Not no, just silence. Again. Binks stood hard heavy. "We'll be back," he said. Because even without a warrant, the truth had already walked through the front door. It was just a matter of time before someone found where it was hiding. It had been nearly a month since anyone had heard Patricia Mann's voice. Not on a phone call, not in person, not even through the muffled warmth of a voicemail. And now, Detective Jerry Binks stood at the edge of the property once again, staring at the house like it was something alive, breathing, hiding, waiting. The wind had picked up. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, as if the sky itself was preparing for the truth. Carol Ray opened the door without a word this time. Her face was tired, her posture slumped. The rehearsed certainty had been replaced with a kind of dull resignation. She knew they weren't going away. "Carol," Binks began, stepping inside slowly. "We need to talk." She nodded once and motioned him in. Pelt followed. The house looked the same as before, dim, cluttered, with half-packed boxes stacked in corners that had sat untouched for weeks. Patricia's reading glasses still rested on the edge of the kitchen counter. Her slippers were tucked neatly beside the couch. It was a shrine of presence. But Patricia was gone, and today Binks was done asking politely. "We want to search the house," he said plainly. Carol paused at the edge of the kitchen. "I told you." Binks stepped closer. "This doesn't look like someone who left. This looks like someone who never got the chance to." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. One small gesture, one glance. It was all he needed. "You're not a killer, Carol," Binks said, softer now. "I don't think you set out to do anything malicious. But if your mother passed, and you panicked, if you didn't know what to do, you can still make this right." She didn't speak. "I'm asking you one last time," he said. "Let us find her. Let her family bury her properly." Carol's lips quivered, and then her voice cracked. "She's not in the house," she whispered. Binks didn't respond. "She's not here," she said again, louder this time. "Then where is she?" he asked. Carol turned away. And that was her answer. The next hour blurred into a flurry of tension. Carol wouldn't give consent, but the inconsistencies in her statements, the verified lies, the impersonation, the sudden shutdown, Binks had finally gathered enough for a judge. The warrant came swiftly. When officers returned that evening, they came in quietly but purposefully. Uniforms on, gloves ready, with flashlights and evidence bags in hand. The search began, room by room, closet by closet. Every drawer opened, every hallway examined. And then they reached the crawl space. It wasn't obvious. It was tucked behind the laundry room, concealed by an old bookshelf that had been shoved against the wall. But one officer noticed the dust on the floor was disturbed, slightly off from the rest. When they pulled the shelf back, a narrow wooden panel revealed itself. Binks crouched, lifted it, and peered into the blackness below. The air was still, but heavy. He clicked on his flashlight and dropped to his knees. Cobwebs, dust, and something else. A blanket, folded carefully in a corner, with something beneath it. He didn't say a word. He just reached for his radio and called it in. The air inside the crawl space was colder than expected. Not from the winter wind, but from the stillness that lived down there. Untouched, undisturbed, holding something more than just dust and dirt. Detective Binks crouched silently, flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand, though he would never admit it. Officers gathered behind him, their faces grave. They all knew what they had found. It wasn't confirmed yet, not officially, but it didn't have to be. The human brain knows certain truths before the mouth will speak them. Beneath the old floral blanket was a plastic tarp, wrapped, weighted, duct taped at the corners. The smell was faint, Dull, sour, but unmistakable. Not overpowering, not like in the movies. Just enough to make your stomach tighten and your eyes water. "Call the coroner," Binks said, standing slowly. Officer Pelt backed away, radio in hand, voice low and clipped. Carol sat in the living room as they emerged. She didn't ask what they found. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just closed her eyes and exhaled, long, slow, like someone who'd finally put down a weight too heavy to carry any longer. "I didn't mean to leave her like that," she said softly. The words drifted into the air like a confession and a curse all at once. "I thought I could fix it," she continued. "I just needed time to think. Just time." Detective Binks said nothing. He knew better than to interrupt the silence that sometimes followed guilt. "I found her that morning," Carol whispered. She was just gone, in her room, peaceful but cold. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I called, they'd take the house, take Marina, everything." She wiped her nose, her hand shaking. "So I wrapped her up. I told myself I'd call the next day, and then the next. But the days kept going, and I didn't." Binks leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You lied to her grandson," he said quietly. "You let your own son believe she was alive. You used her name, her money, her voice." Carol didn't respond. The house felt different now. The stillness had shifted. It no longer hummed with secrets. It mourned, grieved, for the woman who had once called it home, who had folded the laundry and made soup and whispered bedtime prayers. A woman who didn't deserve to be hidden in the floor beneath it. The coroner's team arrived in silence. They moved with reverence, every motion practiced and gentle. Patricia's body was removed carefully, respectfully, wrapped again, but this time by people who understood the gravity of death. John arrived just after. He didn't cry right away. He just stood in the driveway, staring at the officers moving in and out of the home where his childhood had unfolded. "Is it her?" he asked. Binks nodded slowly. "We believe so." John lowered his head. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he whispered, "She deserved better." The headlines hit local media first. Elderly woman found deceased in daughter's home crawl space. Carol Ray arrested in connection with mother's disappearance. Then national outlets picked it up. A tragic story of a woman who vanished without a trace and was there all along, buried just feet from where she once lived. Carol Ray was arrested that same night. She didn't resist. She didn't weep. As officers placed the cuffs around her wrists, she simply nodded and whispered, "I'm sorry." But it wasn't clear who she was apologizing to. The charges came quickly: abuse of a corpse, obstruction of justice, identity theft, and pending review for fraudulent use of Social Security and government funds. The district attorney hadn't yet filed a homicide charge, not until the autopsy was complete. But everyone involved knew it was only a matter of time. In the police interview room, Carol barely spoke. Her lawyer advised silence, but occasionally she broke. She didn't want to go to a nursing home, she mumbled once. She said this was her home. I just wanted to keep it together. For Marina. For me. But Detective Binks had heard every version of the story by now, and none of them added up to mercy. Because if Patricia had died peacefully, why hide her? Why impersonate her? Why lie to her grandson? Because Patricia Mann wasn't just hidden, she was erased, stolen from her family, from her community, from her name, reduced to a false digital presence and buried in silence while her daughter lived above her, pretending nothing had changed. John sat in the back of the courtroom on the day of Carol's arraignment. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. He just listened. The prosecutor listed the charges with the calm fury of someone who had seen too many families torn apart. The defendant not only concealed the death of her mother, she said, but actively used that concealment to gain financial benefits, to manipulate her own son, and to obstruct an official investigation. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a calculated pattern of deceit. The judge nodded. Bail was denied. Carol was taken back into custody. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. John gave one statement. "I don't want vengeance," he said. "I want my grandmother to be remembered for who she was, not for how she was buried." Then he walked away, grief like gravity in his steps, because justice might come, but it would never bring back what was taken. The house was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This quiet was colder, final. There was no longer tension humming in the walls, no secrets curled into corners, just silence, real, hollow, and echoing. Patricia Mann was gone, and Carol Ray was behind bars, but the house still stood, unchanged. John returned only once, weeks after the discovery, not to reclaim it, not to stay, but to say goodbye. He stood in the front yard, keys borrowed from the property administrator, his breath visible in the early morning air. The neighborhood looked the same. Kids rode bikes, dogs barked in the distance. Life went on, like it always did, like it always would. But this home, his grandmother's home, was now just a shell. Inside, the furniture sat exactly where it had before. The recliner near the window, the tea-stained coaster on the end table, the faded rug beneath the kitchen table where Patricia used to sit with Marina and hum softly while she poured cereal. Her scent was gone now. Just the faintest whisper of lavender and lemon, overwritten by dust and emptiness. John moved room to room in silence. He stopped in the hallway where the crawlspace panel had been pried open. He didn't look down, didn't want to. Instead, he walked into Patricia's bedroom, the last place she'd been seen alive. Everything was still there. Neatly made bed, slippers lined beneath the nightstand, a robe hanging on the back of the door. It looked as though she might walk in at any second, but she wouldn't. She never would. John sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer beside him. Inside was a photo album, worn, corner bent, filled with years of birthdays, backyard cookouts, school projects, and holidays that Patricia had quietly held together. He flipped through the pages slowly. One photo caught him off guard. Patricia, mid-laugh, holding a tray of cookies, flour on her cheek, Marina tugging at her apron. He hadn't seen that one in years. He smiled, and then the tears came. They weren't violent. They weren't loud. They simply came, and he let them, because the grief was real now, no longer wrapped in suspicion or waiting for answers. It was here, final and sharp and devastating. He stayed there for almost an hour, not talking, not moving, just remembering. When he finally stood to leave, he walked to the front door, turned back once, and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything." Then he locked it behind him and walked away from the house that used to be full of life. Now just a house, without her. Patricia Mann is gone. A mother, a grandmother, a quiet woman who never raised her voice, who gave more than she took, and who died not with violence, but with silence. Not in a blaze, but in a lie. Her death didn't make headlines for long. After the initial shock wore off, the cameras moved on. New stories rose, new crimes took their place. But for those who knew her, and those who lived through what happened, the ache remained. John Miller still carries it. Every time he drives past a house that looks like hers, every time he receives a message from someone asking how he's doing, every time he closes his eyes and remembers the sound of her voice, soft, steady, humming lullabies to Marina. He will never forget the betrayal, not just from Carol, but from the silence of those around them. Neighbors who looked away, relatives who didn't ask enough questions, a system that waited too long to step in. And the lesson? That sometimes the danger isn't in the scream, it's in the hush. That some people vanish not in dark alleyways, but in living rooms, behind closed doors, with someone they trusted watching them fade. This wasn't just a story about a crime. It was a story about a slow erasure. A woman who poured herself into her family, only to disappear into her own floorboards. It's a warning. That abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like being ignored, dismissed, treated as invisible. And that neglect, left unchecked, can rot into something far more lethal. The house Patricia once filled with warmth will likely be sold, emptied, repainted. But her story, it lingers. In the cracks beneath the carpet, in the lies left behind, and in the heart of a grandson who tried and refused to stay silent. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is not what people do to you, it's what they pretend didn't happen.